One of the saints that we love the most here at WalletWin is Saint Katharine Drexel, and today we are just blessed beyond belief to have Sister Pat here from the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, the order that Saint Katharine founded, here on the podcast today, and we're going to chat about her founder and our patroness, Saint Katharine. Thank you very much for joining us today, Sister.
You're very welcome. I'm very happy to be with you and share what I can.
It's such a gift to have you here. We are thrilled for our listeners to be able to kind of get this inside peek into St. Katharine's life. But as we get started, would you mind sharing a little bit about your own story, Sister Pat, just how you discerned your vocation to become a Sister of the Blessed Sacrament?
I'd be very happy to do that. I grew up in Chicago. And I have been a Sister of the Blessed Sacrament coming this September. I'll be 57 years. I entered then in 1965, and that was during the Civil Rights Movement. And for myself, as a young person growing up in Chicago, I guess I was pretty much appalled as I became aware of the injustices that were going on in the Black community. I learned that more basically from watching on TV when you saw what was going on with the different when they had different protests, and also from school. And there was just something within my heart. I wanted to make this world a better place. From probably even before that, I was drawn very much. I wanted to do some type of missionary work. I wanted to share the Gospels with others. But I was very much drawn also to the Blessed Sacrament. I had a great love for the Eucharist, and whenever I had a chance going to work or coming from school or doing whatever I was doing, I'd try to pop into church just for a few minutes, just to be in the presence. And I guess as I was discerning my vocation, it was God putting all these different pieces together for me. Though as a young person, I probably didn't have the brains at that time to realize all that was happening. But when I look at it, I see it in terms for our congregation. It is that whole idea of being missionary, of going places, a lot of times when other people are hesitant to go. Be able to share that gospel message of Jesus, to be centered on the Eucharist, to be centered on social justice. And our congregation had all those pieces together. And so God drew me then to the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. And so for 57 years, as I said, I've been living this life, and I have been blessed over and over again. So I consider my life a very blessed one, and it continues to be at this point.
I love your story. I love just thinking about, you walking around in Chicago and popping in to see Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. There's a lot of churches in Chicago, and they're very beautiful. So
very beautiful. In those days, too, the churches were open. Life is a little bit different now. But in those days, the churches were open, so you could always go in and just for a few minutes, just kind of like to say hello and go about your business. And that was always a joy for me to be able to do it.
Wonderful. So 57 years, a beautiful vocation that you've had. Can you tell me a little bit about just how you started to hear about your foundress, St. Katharine, and just kind of how her story evolved as time went on? She wasn't canonized until, was it the year 2000?
Right, correct.
So she probably wasn't, you probably learned more about her over the years.
Truly, I really did. I wasn't drawn, truthfully, as far as the congregation went, I wasn't even really that much aware of Katharine Drexel at the very beginning. She died in 1955. I entered in 1965. I was aware, before I entered, I was aware that she founded the congregation. I'm presuming some type of materials I received or whatever. And I remember reading her life, the story of her life. But I think for Mother Catherine, for the sisters, certainly in those early years, it was never about her as a person. Mm-hmm. It was always about the mission. It was always about the people. It was always about the Eucharist. And so not really until much later did I really kind of become more aware of her whole total story, of how amazing it is and what a really holy, holy woman she was and continues to be. As for our congregation, her tomb at that time, the tomb right now of Katharine Drexel is moved to the cathedral here in Philadelphia. It had been at our mother house. We are in the process of selling our mother house, though. Mm. So in 2018, the body was transferred to the cathedral. But prior to that, when it was at the mother house, we were always invited to go and to pray by her crypt if we wished, which I would do, periodically. Then after she was canonized, of course, it became a center and many people came. Mm-hmm. But in those very early days, it was never a whole lot about her, and she never wanted it to be about her. She always wanted it to be about Jesus and the Eucharist, and even basically, I think when she was at the mother house, one of the things we used to think, people would come to pray at her tomb, especially after she was canonized. But we also had the Adoration of the Blessed Sacrament always in the chapel every day. So people would come to pray at her tomb, but then they'd come up to the chapel to pray. Mm-hmm. And we always thought how fitting that was, because that's really what she wanted, was to draw people to Jesus.
Would you mind, some of our listeners aren't that familiar with the story of St. Catherine's life. Would you be able to walk us through kind of how she became the woman of God that she was?
Sure. I would be delighted to be able to do that. I think I give you, first of all, begin with a little summary. It was a book written by Lou Baldwin at the time of her canonization. And on the cover, there's a picture of Katharine Drexel as a debutante. Mm. And he has the words around it. And I really love them. He said, Katharine Drexel was a millionaire's daughter, a debutante who chose poverty over wealth, the oppressed over society, and Christ over comfort. Mm. So that kind of gives you just a little summary of her.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. In 1891, she founded the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. And the purpose, our goal, or our mission really is to minister with the Black and Native American peoples in terms of social justice and in bringing people to the Eucharist. Katharine herself was born on November the 26th in 1858. Her father was Francis Anthony Drexel. He was a banker and a Catholic. Her mother was Hannah Jane Langstroth, and she was a Quaker. And when Katharine was born, she already had an older sister, Elizabeth. She was 3 years old. But 5 weeks after Katharine was born, her mom died. Hmm. So then Katharine and her sister Elizabeth went to live with their uncle and their aunt. And her uncle, Anthony, which is the brother of her father, is also the founder of Drexel University here in Philadelphia. So people might be aware of that. So that's part of the family there. In 1860, her father remarried, and he remarried Emma Mary Bouvier, and she's a distant relative of Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy. And they had one daughter then, Louise. So there were 3 girls then. There was Elizabeth and Katharine and Louise. And Katharine and her sisters, again, they were homeschooled, and they had with tutors, and they traveled throughout the United States and Europe. Because I mentioned, her father was a banker, and he was really their family was very wealthy. But the one thing that both her father and her mother taught the girls from very early on, that the wealth they had was not just for their own use, but they were to use it in ways to be able to share for those who have a need. They were also a very prayerful family. And from what I can understand, they lived here in Philadelphia on what would be called Center City now, on Walnut Street. Of course, the house is now no longer there. But their home had a little chapel even in it. So when the father would come from work, he would kind of go into that room and just, I guess, kind of, center himself a bit. Her mother opened their home three times a week for the poor. Now you have to remember, this is a very wealthy section of Philadelphia at that time, where the home was located. Mm-hmm. And she called what she did Dorcas, after the charitable women in the Acts of the Apostles. So after a while, the girls, were young first, and they would observe what their mother was doing. And then after a while, they kind of participated in that. And one of the things, her mother was very, even in helping the poor, she did it with the greatest of dignity, of wanting to be able to help others, but always do it in a way that their dignity would be respected. In 1883, though, Emma, which is the mother, died from cancer. And prior to that, Catherine was kind of helping mother, taking care of the mother. And I guess really it was during that time that Catherine really began to look at life and to say, what is really life all about? Mm-hmm. I had mentioned, she was a debutante. She had, I think, different suitors, I guess you'd say at those times, and people kind of looking, or men wanting to marry her. But she didn't, there's just something about it. She knew there was something more that she wanted in life. And the wealth in that was not something that ever was something that she was excited about or drawn to. Mm-hmm. She, I guess, went through the motions of it. If you're in that category of wealth, you have to go to those debutante balls and all that. But I don't think it was something she was all excited about, from what I can understand. But after that, she began to feel really like a call to religious life. She was very much really interested more, though, in cloistered religious life. Mm. There was a priest at that time that was a good friend of the family, a Father O'Connor, who later became Bishop O'Connor. But he became her spiritual advisor. Because of the generosity, though, of the Drexel family, and this is both the mother and the dad, as I expressed, different missionaries would come to their home and would visit them. And priests in particular that worked in the West, with the Native American peoples and the various tribes, would come, and they would share the great need with her parents, really, and Catherine and her sisters heard all of this. They also joined their father on business trips to the West. And during that time, they saw for themselves the great needs and also the injustices that was done by our country to the Native American peoples, with the various treaties that were made and broken and people being pushed to different reservations and all of that. So she had a great heart for that and a great concern about the injustice that was done, and a great desire also for the people to know about the Eucharist, about Jesus. So in 1885, though, Mr. Drexel died. He died suddenly. He just had a heart attack in the home. And that was really devastating for Catherine and her sisters. So after maybe a year or so after the father died, the girls went on a trip, and they went to Europe. Because again, I said, these are very rich women, so they spent a lot of time. I don't think it was a 3-week vacation. It was months, that they went to Europe, to the spas and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But in the midst of all of that, on January the 27th in 1887, it was arranged, maybe by that time through Bishop O'Connor or some bishop, that the girls would have a private audience with Pope Leo XIII. And probably Pope Leo was aware of the generosity the Drexels had to the various missions. Mm-hmm. And during that particular audience, Catherine spoke up, and I'm not too sure. In audiences, if you speak up, I don't know if you do that, but she did, And she asked Pope Leo to send missionaries from Europe to work with the Native American peoples. She very much wanted priests. And he just looked at her. And his reply, though, really kind of shook her from what we can understand. He said to her, "Why not become a missionary yourself, my child?" And we are told that after that audience, she really became very physically ill. And she cried. She couldn't understand what it was that he meant. Like I mentioned, she was being drawn to religious life, but a cloistered religious life. And the idea about being a missionary and all that was, she couldn't quite probably comprehend it. And the fact that it was coming from the Pope, I think it just added another whole level of, like, what is it? What am I supposed to do with this,
Mm-hmm.
But so she returned home, came back to the States here to Philadelphia, and she began to pray about this. And so again, she approached Bishop O'Connor about this possibility of, going to religious life, of being there. And he really discouraged her because, again, these girls had a lot of money at their discretion now. And he said she could do more in the world, as he would put it, as a laywoman with her wealth to help the poor, the Native American people. And also during this time, she became, this is now, you have to remember, right after the Civil War, she became also aware of the needs of the black people. Because this is right after slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So he said to her, "No, stay in the world, and make your contributions, and you'll help them in better that way." However, she really continued to pray about it and discern about it. And when you read about her life, she was very clear in her discernment. She did pros and cons, and what would it be like, and she was very honest. The idea about having to live religious life with a bunch of women, and maybe they'd be old maids, and she wouldn't like that, and stuff like that, and stuff about. She was very honest about her discernment, But then in the end, she really continued to feel drawn, and so in the end, though, Bishop O'Connor said, "Okay." But then he added another thing to it, and that he told her that she needed to found her own congregation. Because he said to her, you can't when you enter religious life, you're not going to be telling them what to do. You can't be telling them with your money. First of all, you wouldn't have the use of your money if you were in another congregation. And he said, it just doesn't work that way. He said, you will have to found your own congregation. Mm-hmm. So that was another thing that she really had to take to prayer. Because it's one thing entering religious life, but it's another whole thing to found a congregation.
Sure.
The responsibility of that all the way around for so many dimensions of it, it's tremendous. So she took that to prayer. But in the end, through her prayer and through God working through her, on March the 19th, she made her decision that yes, she'll found a congregation and she will begin this journey. So in 1889, she entered the novitiate of the Sisters of the Mercy in Pittsburgh to prepare for what God was asking her to do. Because again, she had to go to some place that was living religious life. You don't just wake up and say, okay, I'm going to do this, and even put on a habit.
Yeah.
And become a nun. You have to be trained. You have to, what is this really all about? Mm-hmm. So in 1889, she went. On February the 12th, in 1891, our congregation, the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, was really founded. Because it was on that day then that she professed her first vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Mm-hmm. And she took a fourth vow, which was to be the mother and servant of the Indian and Negro races. After that, she came back here to Philadelphia, and the congregation grew. It attracted other women who, like St. Catherine, desired to care for the needs of the Black and Native American peoples, to bring the Eucharist, and to bring social justice. Catherine was a very wise and astute businesswoman, too. Mm-hmm. During her time, she opened and staffed and directly supported 60 schools in the West and in the South. including St. Michael's Indian School on the Navajo Reservation, and also Xavier University of Louisiana, which is the only historically Black and Catholic university in the country. And both of those schools continue in the mission today. Katharine understood very much from the very beginning the importance and power of education, to empower people so they can create their own futures, and lead their own communities. So that was very much, it was the idea of, there's that story you probably have heard about, I'm kind of paraphrasing it a bit here, I guess you give somebody a fish and they're going to come back to you tomorrow because they ate the fish.
Yep.
But if you teach somebody to fish, then they're set for life. And I think that was very much in terms of her whole idea in terms of education. So very much of what we did as Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament was in terms of education, from primary schools all the way up to the university level. Until 1935, she served as the Superior General of the congregation. But then due to health concerns, she had to give up that role. And it was interesting because then for the next 20 years of her life, she was really led a life of prayer. Kind of God gave her, we always think of it like the gift of what she wanted, that contemplative life. So she was able to do that for the last 20 years. And where our mother house, when we were located there in Ben Salem, there's a certain part where she would go in and she could just look over the chapel and pray in the presence of the exposed Blessed Sacrament. And she'd pray for the world and pray for the missions and everything all around, And in 1964, her cause for canonization was opened. And in 1988, she was beatified. In 2000, she was canonized. And interesting, both the miracle for the beatification and for the canonization had to do with the healing of children that were deaf. So sometimes, when we looked at that in those days, and we can still now, the idea is like, what is God saying? And I think through her, the importance of listening, and how we all have to listen to God's word, listen to each other, to be able to do what it is that God is, truly asking of us. The other thing I think maybe because of the nature of the work that you do that you might be interested in is a little bit more about the finances in terms with Katharine herself. Because the fact she founded the congregation, she then was able to use the inheritance that she received from her father for the mission. At the time of the father's death, her parents, I guess, even in their death, the parents taught the girls the value and importance of philanthropy and charity.
Yeah.
They left 10% of their accumulated wealth to other charities. The other $14 million was left to the daughters in a form of a trust. And Mr. Drexel, though, was very wise. He did it in such a way that he provided so that his daughters, and I think they have it somewhere written, that they would be able to live as they were accustomed to. Because again, I said, these are women that were wealthy women. However, his will also indicated that once the daughters died, because this money came through the daughters, their children could inherit the money, but no husbands. So this was his way of protecting his daughters in case some guy thought, let me marry them. That wasn't going to work for that, But if there were no children, then the remaining money was to go to the various charities that Mr. Drexel had designated. Now, Mother Catherine's two sisters that I had mentioned, Louise and Elizabeth, died before Mother Catherine did, and there were no children. So since Mother Katharine founded the congregation after her father's death, the sisters, though, themselves, we were not listed in the will.
Right.
Because of the fact we weren't founded yet, So Mother Catherine was told by lawyers that she could take that will to court, because certainly the father would have wanted the congregation to share in that money.
Right.
And I guess to break, what they say, break the will, or change the will, whatever you do. But anyway, she said no. She said the sisters would trust in divine providence.
Mm.
So when Mother Catherine died, the congregation no longer had the money to assist in the missions. However, the remaining money, so the remaining money went to the other charities that Mr. Drexel had in his will.
Right.
However, Mother Catherine, again, like I said, she was a very wise businesswoman, and she could see into the future of what would be happening, when she was a younger woman. So with that, she did a lot of wise planning and stewardship over those years. And because of that, and her belief and trust in divine providence, that did work, provided for what we needed, be able to do the mission and to take care of what we were responsible for. We always had what we needed. We didn't always have what we wanted, but we always had what we needed.
Yes.
So I think Mother Catherine, again, I said she was a very wise steward with her money. There's another, I don't have access to it right now, but there was an article in, I think it was the Boston Catholic paper this past week, here in the Catholic Philadelphia paper. And then also there's a magazine that's put out, I think quarterly, by the Josephite Fathers out of Baltimore. And it was about Mother Catherine's tax law. It's a very interesting article. I could send you a copy of it and you could look at it. I'm sure you might be interested in it. But the tax law was such that, before this law that she helped push through Congress, truthfully, was that I guess when you do your taxes, you have to pay taxes on all the money that you have and everything like that, unless you do charitable things.
Right.
However, this law was constructed, it was such, it's called the Nun Law. And it was that if you gave 50% of your money to charity, I guess you didn't have to pay taxes on that, but you had to do that for the past 10 years. So I couldn't just decide to do it 1 year or something like that,
Right.
And they said for her, she gave 90% of her money to charity. So she far exceeded the 50%.
Right.
And that law, I think, was in effect, I forgot what every year they said, but she was a person who, she knew how to do things in the correct way, but always to be able to do it for the good of other people, and for sharing the gospel.
So you were a member in, you were already a professed sister by the time she was canonized in year 2000. Were you able to be there at her canonization?
Yes, that was a marvelous, marvelous time. They probably had about, I guess, I don't know, maybe 1,000, 2,000 people went for her canonization. It was a marvelous time. It was in, when she was canonized at St. Peter's Square, and it was done outside with Pope John Paul II.
Mm-hmm.
But also there were 100 Chinese martyrs. There was Josephine Bakhita, who had been a slave from the Sudan. And I'm sorry to say there's a sister from Spain who was also canonized. I always forget her name when I forget it right now. And Mother Catherine. So that was one, and it was also Jubilee year.
Oh, that's right.
So to be able to be there, we were very blessed. I would say probably with the sisters, maybe about 100 of us went. We had a benefactor that enabled us to be able to go. We just had to be able to walk 20 minutes unassisted to be able to get there to go.
Right.
And but it was a marvelous event. And I think the thing was, first you saw the Universal Church. You saw people from all the continents there. And that in itself, you see the people of God from everywhere. And that was marvelous. And the day itself was kind of like, I'm just looking at today, we're in Philadelphia, I'm speaking, and it's raining. And it was doing that day in St. Peter's Square. So we had the umbrellas up and down, you know. But the thing was, when Pope John Paul II declared her a saint and said her name, the sun came out. So we were like, whoa, you know, that was really something. Mm-hmm. But it was a marvelous time. And I think, too, how God provides, because that day when we had the scripture readings, it was a Sunday. And I cannot quote for you the particular scripture reading, but one of our sisters did it. And I would say she did a marvelous job with it. But it was proclaiming really of God saying to people, for people who are rich and who do not help others, there was a condemnation of it in that reading. Mm-hmm. And I thought, whoa, it was like something you might have chosen. But this was not something we chose. This was part of the liturgical readings, you know, and how God works through all of that. So that was a very, very powerful time. And then the other thing that was very powerful for us is that after you have your big mass and everything like that, but then a day or so afterwards, your particular group is given the opportunity to have a mass of thanksgiving for that saint. Mm-hmm. And part of that is that the mass of canonization is, well, I guess I'll put it very simply. When any of the groups that are being canonized, there's regular rituals and all of that. You do not have a say about much of anything in that particular liturgy. Mm-hmm. But on the Mass of Thanksgiving, you do. You have much more leeway in terms of the music, in terms of reading, in terms of everything. You know, sure. It's more suited to you. So our Mass that day was the next day was at St. Paul outside the wall, that particular basilica. Beautiful. And it was a beautiful place. And the thing I think that was very moving for all the sisters, and when we talk about it, that this is one of the things we still always talk about, that prior to that, we all lined up, you know, they had us lined up in the back somewhere, and then we walked in. And we had the choir from Xavier University was doing the singing, and we had all kinds of bishops and priests and cardinals and all there, you know, too. But anyway, as we walked into the church, into the basilica, in procession, all the people that were part of our group that were there for canonization, they all clapped. They stood up and clapped. And for each sister, I think tears just came to our eyes, because the gratitude that was being expressed by the people, we realized it was a gratitude for the shoulders of the sisters that we stand in, the sisters that were not there. Many of the sisters that were in eternal life already. That was the gratitude that was there, certainly for those of us that were walked in the procession. But we realized that clapping wasn't just for us, right, but it was for all those that had gone before us, you know. And that was such I guess, you know, when Jesus tells us, you know, that you will get your 100-fold, you know, you have homes all over and brothers and sisters and that. I think for us that was part of that 100-fold, that experience, that gratitude of the people, and the love between the people and the sisters, which is such a very great bond, I think. Because I think our sisters, besides being educators, were also people that we didn't just teach. We visited in the homes. We did whatever we could to help people in terms of whatever their particular situations were. And I think most of all, and when you hear that, when you speak to anyone who is our alumni, and that is that the love that the sister showed, and also the dignity for the person. And the idea that was kind of, I guess I'll use the words, drummed into those children, that you can be and do anything that you want, which was not always the message society was giving the people at that time, and sometimes even today yet. So it was a marvelous, marvelous time.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Sounds wonderful. Can you share a little bit, since that was in the year 2000, the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament continue the ministry, the mission work. Where are you located, and what are the sisters up to now?
After 131 years, we are still located. We're much smaller now. Our numbers are much smaller, so we aren't able to reach as much as we would like. However, we are still in inner cities. We're still in small rural towns, and we're on the reservation. Mm-hmm. Our sisters continue to be involved in parish ministry, in religious education, and social services. We're also involved in regular education from preschool to the university levels. Mm-hmm. And we have some sisters now that are working as chaplains in hospitals and in nursing facilities. Some are also doing administrative work. Some are doing kind of work more that would be, you would say, care of the earth. So though our numbers are growing smaller, we continue to carry out the mission, mm-hmm. and hopefully to be those witnesses to others of the Eucharist, of bringing all people to Jesus.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing these stories. I mean, I know for us personally, we've just had smiles plastered on our face the entire time. We've always loved the different stories from St. Catherine's life. I've always admired her. You mentioned after her father's death, she went over to Europe, and I read a book where it talked about, she did go to a spa for a month.
Right, right. Yeah.
She took care of herself, but then also only to the degree that it, helped her continue puttering on to answer Jesus's call.
Right. Yeah.
And just always had that really beautiful just kind of balance between being grounded here on earth, but also always remembering that we were made for eternity. And I think that that's a hard balance to strike, and I just love how St. Catherine did that.
I think that's very true. I think one of the things, too, when you read her writings, and you look at her words, I send a little something out every month to our associates, and there's like a quote every day from her, Mm-hmm. And so sometimes when I read those words myself, I think to myself, oh my goodness, you say, okay, if a person, if they're canonized as saints, you say, well, certainly they are holy people. But when you really take into account and you read their words, and you realize the depth of the relationship that they had with Jesus, it is astounding. It really is, and I think for myself, when I read those words on certain days, and I thought, wow, Mother, you thought this, you said this. And I thought, I'm one of your daughters, Mm-hmm. But I'm just so grateful, I guess, to, like I said, in discerning the vocation, I didn't have all the, I guess I'll put the brains of some things, you just, how God leads you. But I thought, oh my goodness, how God has led me to this woman who just was so in love with Jesus. And I guess, for all of us, I think whatever it is that we love, we like to be around other people who have those same interests. If you like to garden, or you like to fish, or you like to, I don't know, whatever you like to do, you're always happy to be around other people about that, because you can talk about that.
Yes.
And I think that's the same thing with us in our relationship with Jesus, the different saints. If our desire for Jesus is there, and they had that desire, then we are good friends with them, because we share that same wantings as they did. Mm-hmm. So,
a lot of our listeners are maybe younger families. They've got kids in the home still. They're trying to manage all this. What do you think is a lesson from St. Catherine's, her life, or her outlook, your guys' mission, that you think applies well to them, that how they can be inspired and live this out in their own lives?
I think a couple things. One, I think looking at Catherine's family herself, the importance, I think, for parents to realize how your children are watching and listening to everything you say and you do. Mm-hmm. Catherine and her sisters observed their parents. They observed their parents praying. They observed their parents helping the poor. They observed their parents being people who respected others. And I think that is the greatest thing. I think we can all do a lot of talking, like I'm doing here right now. But the big thing is the example. Yeah. And I don't think there's any more powerful example than parents in the lives of their children. And so I think for anyone who is you have young parents, if they're listening to this podcast, never ever underestimate the power of your example for your children. Mm-hmm. It's not a whole lot of big stuff you have to do. It's the day in and the day out. When they see you praying, when they hear you saying, okay, this is Lent time or whenever time, you're going to give money to the poor. Or there's different things going on. Let's do this to be able to help others. That is going to make the biggest impression on the child, I think, and will sustain them in their life when they grow up. Because no matter what happens, and even sometimes as kids get bigger, things happen. Sometimes they go their own ways, and sometimes ways people or parents are not too happy about. But I think if they have that foundation, in the end, God is going to use that and draw them to be the good people that their parents want them to be. So I don't think you can ever underestimate the importance of example in the lives of parents for their children, no matter how small they are, because they will imitate you. And I can tell you, I'm a former teacher, so I can tell you what kids will tell you when they come to school. And some things you say, that stays in the home. We're not going to talk about that here, But they do, so I think there's no more, what a high vocation to be a parent, to have that type of an influence on another human being for life. And it's like that ripple effect, about how that will go forth. You never know. Because what your child will do, you think of Katharine Drexel, even with her parents, the example they were giving for their children, I'm sure the father never had any thought in his mind that his daughter was then going to follow that example. And so many people would follow her. And because of that, so many other people are brought to it's an astounding thing. So the power of parenthood is terrific.
Thank you for that nugget of wisdom. It's so important.
Kick in the pants, yeah.
Just again, thank you so much for going through these stories and sharing about the life of St. Catherine. I'm sure that there are listeners right now wondering, how can they support the work of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, or where can they find out more about the work that you do? Are you online, or how can people reach out?
Oh, yeah. Everything's online these days, so it's www.katharineDrexel.org. And if you go to that site, you will see our website. They'll tell you more about Catherine herself, some of the same things I said, and maybe other additional things. And then about the missions, about the ministries, about how to donate. I'll put it there too. So it's all there. So you can easily find that.
Wonderful. So that's KatharineDrexel.org, and we'll have a link if you're listening to this on the podcast. You just go to the show notes, and we'll have a link you can click to get over there.
Wonderful.
Nice and easy.
That's great. Thank you. It's wonderful talking with you all. It's always a pleasure to talk about something that you love. So to be able to talk about Mother Catherine, to be able to talk about our congregation, the Sisters of Blessed Sacrament, to be able to talk about my vocation, that's a sheer joy. So I thank you for giving me that opportunity.
You're very welcome.
Certainly.
Well, thank you again for joining us today. We have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. For everybody listening, go down to the show notes, click the links, and you can go find out more about the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. Until next time, bye for now.